Chapter 9 of the A.E.F. with General Pershing and the American Forces. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. The A.E.F. with General Pershing and the American Forces by Heywood Broun. Chapter 9. Letters Home. The British Army tells a story of a soldier who had been at the front for a year and a half without ever once writing home. This state of affairs was called to the attention of his officer, who summoned the soldier and asked him if he had no relatives. The Tommy admitted that he had a mother and an aunt. "I want you to go back to quarters," said the captain, "and stay there until you've written a letter, then bring it to me." The soldier was gone for 2 hours, and then he returned and handed the officer a single sheet of letter paper. His note read, "Dear Ma, this war is a blighter. Tell Annie, with love, Alfred." It was different in the American Army. The doughboys wrote to their families, to the second and third cousin. One soldier turned 52 letters over to his lieutenant for censorship in a single day. The men hardly seemed to need the suggestion posted on the wall of every YMCA hut, "Remember to write to Mother today." Of course, it was not always Mother. I came upon a couple of lieutenants one afternoon hard at work on an enormous batch of letters. It was originally intended that the chaplain should censor all the mail for the regiment, but it was found that the task would be far beyond the powers of any one man. In time the job came to absorb a large part of the energy of the junior officers. "This," said one of the officers, "is the 5th soldier who's written that our officers are brave, intelligent, and kind. I know I'm brave and intelligent, but I'm not so damn kind." And he ripped out half a page of over-faithful description of the country. "The man I have here," said the second officer, "has got a joke. He says, if I ever get home, the Statue of Liberty will have to turn around if she ever wants to see me again. It was all right the first time, but now I've gotten to his 10th letter, and he's still using it." It has been found that more than 50% of the mail sent home consists of love letters. The fact that they have to be censored does not cramp the style of the writers in the least. One letter was so ardent as to arouse admiration. "The man writes the best love letter I've ever read," said a lieutenant, looking up. "The only trouble is that he is writing to 5 girls at once, and he uses the same model every time. 2 of the girls live in the same town at that." Most of the letters were cheerful, some courageously so. One man, who was near death from tuberculosis, wrote home once a day, recounting imaginary events which had happened outside the walls of his hospital. In the letters he would send himself on long marches over the hills of France, and describe the woods and meadows and plowed fields as they looked to him on bright mornings. He described in detail work which he was doing in bombing, and the only complaint he ever made was on the day when he had coughed himself to such weakness that he could hardly finish his daily letter. He wrote to his mother then, and asked her to excuse the briefness of his note. He explained that he was pretty well fagged out from a long afternoon of bayonet drill. The soldiers frequently commented on the kindness of the French people, and they were also fond of boasting, with perhaps doubtful justification, that they were already proficient in the French language. A few were desirous of giving the folk back home a thrill. One man, working as a company cook at a port in France, some 300 or 400 miles from the firing line, wrote a weekly letter describing all sorts of war activities. He made up air raids and heavy bombardments, and fairly tore up the village in which he was living. Curiously enough, he never made himself conspicuous in these actions. According to the letters, he was just there with the rest, taking the strafing as best he could. The officer who censored his first warlike letter cut out all the imaginative fights. But 2 days later, the soldier wrote another letter, even more thrilling. He complained that it was difficult to write because the explosion of big shells nearby made the house rock. The lieutenant called him up then and said, "You are writing a lot of lies home, aren't you?" "Yes, sir," said the soldier. "Well, what are you doing it for?" continued the officer. The soldier shifted about in embarrassment, and then he said, "Well, you see, sir, those letters are to my father. He went into the Union Army when he was 16, and fought all through the last 2 years of the war. He lives in a little town in Ohio, and the people there call him Fighting Bill on account of what he did in the Civil War. Well, when I went away to this war, he began to go around town and tell everybody that I was going to do fighting that would make 'em all forget about the Civil War. He used to say that I came of fighting stock, and that I'd make 'em sit up and take notice. It would be pretty tough for him, sir, if I had to write home and say that I was cooking down in a town where you can't even hear the guns." "That's all right," said the lieutenant, "but some of the people who've got sons in this regiment will be doing a lot of worrying long before they have any need to." "No, sir," said the soldier. "My father don't know what regiment I'm with. I was transferred when I got over here, and the only address he's got is the military post office number." "I don't know what to say in that case," replied the lieutenant. "It's a cinch you're not giving away any military information, and I can't see how you're giving any aid and comfort to the enemy. I guess you can go on with that battle stuff. Make the bombardments just as hard as you like, but keep the casualties light." In contrast to the attitude of the veteran back in Ohio was a letter which a captain received from the mother of one of his men. "My son is only 19, she wrote, "and he has never been away from home before, and it breaks my heart that he should be in France. It may sound foolish, but I want to ask you a favor. When he was a little boy, I used to let him come into the kitchen and bake himself little cakes. I think he would remember some of that still. Can't you use him in the bakery or the kitchen or some place so he won't have to be put in the firing line or in the trenches? I will pray for you, Captain, and I pray to God we may have peace for all the world soon." The captain read the letter, and then he burned it up. "If the rest of the men in the company heard of that, they would jolly the life out of that boy," he said. But he sat down and wrote to the mother. "Your boy is well, and I think he is enjoying his work. I cannot promise to do what you ask, because your son is one of the best soldiers in my company. We are all in this together, and must share the dangers. I pray with you that there may be peace and victory soon." No complete story of America's part in the war will ever be written until somebody has made a collection and read thousands of letters home. The doughboy is strangely inarticulate. He can't or he won't tell you how he felt when he first landed in France, or heard the big guns, or went to the trenches. He is afraid to be caught in a sentimental pose, but this fear leaves him when he writes. In his letters he will pose at times. This is not uncommon. Many a man who would never think of saying anything about saving France will write about it in rounded sentences. His deepest and frankest thoughts will come out in letters. Of course the censors stand between these makers of history and posterity. We must wait for our chronicles of the war because of the censor. The newspaper stories about our troops in France on their tremendous errand should ring like the chronicle of an old crusade. But it is hard for the chronicler to bring a tingle when he must write or cable, "Richard the deleted-hearted." When a censor wants to kill a story, he usually says, "Don't you know that your story may possibly give information to the Germans?" The correspondent then withdraws his story in confusion. Of course, what he should answer is, "Very well, that story may give information to the Germans, but it will also give information to the Americans, and just now that is much more important." There are certain military reasons for not naming units and not naming individuals, but the war is not being fought by the army alone. If the country is to be enlisted to its fullest capacity, it must have names. The national character cannot be changed in a few months or a year. The newspapers have brought us up on names. It is too much to expect that the folk back home can keep on their toes if the men they know go away into a great silence as soon as they cross the ocean, and are not heard of again unless their names appear in casualty lists. We can't do less for our war heroes than we have done for Ty Cobb and Christy Mathewson and Smoky Joe Wood. That is not only for the sake of the people back home, but for those at the front as well. They like to know that people are hearing about them. It is not encouraging to them to receive papers and learn that certain units have done something. Just as soon as possible, they want to see the names of their regiment and of D Company and K and F and H. The English name their units after a battle, and so must we. And we must have plenty of names. It helped Ty Cobb not a little in the business of being Ty that thousands of columns of newspaper space had built up a tradition behind him. When Joe Wood got in a hole, it is more than probable that he realized that he must and would get himself out again because he was Smoky Joe. We must do as much for Private Alexander Brown and Corporal James Kelly, and for sergeants and major generals too. We are not a folk who thrive on reticence. It is true that we like to blow our horn, but it must be remembered that Joshua brought down a great fortress in that manner. The trumpets are needed for America. We cannot fight our best to the sound of muffled drums. The man abroad who is sending back the stories of the war must deal with the French censor as well as the American, and that reminds us of Petain's mustache. When the great general came to our camp, all the newspaper stories about his visit were sent to the French military censor. All were allowed to pass in due course except one. The correspondent concerned went around to find out what was wrong. "I'm sorry," said the censor, "but I cannot allow this cable message to go in its present form. You have spoken of General Petain's white mustache. I might stretch a point and allow you to say General Petain's gray mustache, but I should much prefer to have you say General Petain's blonde mustache." "Make it green with small purple spots if you like," said the correspondent, "but let my story go." End of chapter 9.